Afternoon, depending on where you are today. Appreciate your time to join us today as we try to talk about one of the key additional coverages that we offer to small firms. I'm Kevin Collins, the program leader for the A&E program. I'm joined by Jake Terrell, the business development leader for the Southeast. And over the next 28, 29 minutes, we look forward to kind of talking through this opportunity and issues and positioning it well with your client. Thankfully, we have Jake on the phone because Jake has been known to travel a lot, talking to brokers across the country and helping deliver solutions for all of our Victor programs. Jake, if you could maybe just kind of set up your experience on the road of how this topic came to light and why we're focused on it today.
Sure. So as Kevin said, I'm Jake Terrell. I'm the business development leader for the South region. I'm also the business development leader as it relates to the A&E program on a national basis. So we have a team of distribution members in the 4 regions across the country. And each one of us and our team are embedded in different states and manage different states. So one of the things we do is we travel quite a bit, meeting with our brokers and discussing different topics and going over lots of things with the programs, especially enhancements. And one of the most recent we had back in 2020 was our policy coverage enhancements. There were several updates that we made to our insuring agreement. And these are the ones that are listed here. And I'll go over a few here. So like the expansion of the term insured, where we were able to include gig workers, contractors, some non-full-time employees. We also had enhanced rectification applicability, and this really expanded to design build firms, and it was an enhancement that was drawn out really from you, the broker community, where there was a need with your clients for this particular coverage. One of the topics that one of the enhancements that our team has consistently heard since this policy form enhancement has been around the aggregated defense outside the limits. It's a topic that a lot of our brokers have a lot of questions about as it relates to how they are able to position this coverage with their small firms to better help their clients, both short-term and looking at long-term. I'm going to, and again, the reason that you have distribution and underwriting on here is I go out and talk about it and help try to sell the product, and Kevin gets into the real technical detail about what each one of these enhancements are and how they apply and how they might apply to your client. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin and let him focus on the next few slides as it relates to this aggregated defense outside the limits.
Thanks, Jake. So, to line this up, this is an opportunity in our conversation to try to align with your conversation with small firms around risk level and tolerance and how they can best position the value of the coverage offered in the program to their specific needs. So at a high level, this is an additional endorsement available for small firms for an additional premium, but essentially it provides defense outside the limits. So the endorsement would apply as a separate limit tower for situations where claims that are ongoing have claims expenses that are in excess of the firm's deductible. And provide some additional protection both from their limits of liability and from actions where there could be a high cost that could be a real detriment to the firm's profitability or loss ratio to their program, and how better to manage it. So specifically, it provides a separate claims expense limit, again, different than indemnity payment to the plaintiff, but claims expenses limit designed for firms with annual revenues up to $1 million. Part of the benefit here, not only to provide these firms, but again, it operates as a separate limit that addresses claims where defense costs may be elevated. And again, if they're working under contractual obligations where insurance coverage is demanded by the owner to be at a minimum of, then it helps preclude contractual risk should their limit of liability fall below the contractual obligation. And again, helps firms to balance, those issues. The availability of this coverage goes up on an interim basis up to a full $1 million per claim in aggregate in availability as well. So depending on what the firms are interested in buying from a practice policy limit, this endorsement would be able to overlay maybe up to the maximum of the limit that they purchase in the base policy as well. Now, as a broker working with small firms, the question is, what are really the touch points that small firms, respond to and information. And so I wanted to be able to give that to you. Again, the endorsement was added as part of our 2020 coverage update insuring agreement. We filed a handful of additional endorsements, of which this was one of them. Most of the states across the country, 47 in fact, have approved the filing to date and is currently available. The real piece here is it gives that additional bandwidth for firms to manage the risk of high claims and the erosion of limits. So really every conversation that you're having with clients is balanced on the firm's value. I'm dating myself a little bit, but back in the day there was a Fram oil filter commercial. And in that, the tagline was, pay me now or pay me later. And that's really, in this case, the balance of what's the element of risk that the firm wants for certainty of cost, read that as additional premium, versus additional risk to retention obligations around that. And I think that's really the key for brokers working with small firms in this environment, to have a conversation around what's the right option to provide them, or what's the real value that they might be able to do, because you always want to prepare for the possibility that the firm could have a claim later in the policy term. Again, the endorsement is available for firms with annual revenues up to $1 million. Loss experience is a consideration, but a lot of the firms in the program would qualify for this piece. More importantly, I think from your standpoint, the option here is availability to purchase either 25% of the practice limit or 50% of the practice limit as availability for additional cost. And roughly that 25% equates to about a 5% additional premium of the base premium. 50% equates to 10%. So as an example, if a firm carries a $1 million practice limit, they would have the option to buy either a $250,000 separate limit or a $500,000 separate limit to moderate those claims experience. And again, the limit revolves around $250,000 to $1 million. So as long as the firm is carrying a minimum of $250,000, this endorsement's available, and again, all the way up to firms carrying $1 million. From a practical standpoint, it really creates two towers of how it be able to come through, and to kind of talk through that. This is obviously a very simple slide, but when you're talking to clients about any type of insurance coverage, whether it's practice policy, a P&C coverage, or property policy, you've always got the base terms and conditions that would include a limit and some level of SIR retention component, in our case a retention deductible. And so again, this endorsement is meant to operate separately, but in combination with the practice policy. So for instance, if you have a firm that has a $1 million practice policy with a $2,000 each and every deductible, and that firm has some concern about frivolous lawsuits or would like some additional protection from large defense costs on individual claims, you may recommend, and they may purchase, for instance, a 50% separate limit for claims expense that would equate to $500,000 for the additional 10% premium. And when the claim's reported, if it's a situation where litigation is ongoing, so they're paying for attorney's fees and claims expenses, that first $2,000 deductible is always the first insurance company. The firm would be obligated in each and every deductible to meet that requirement. But after that is where the limits of liability come into play. So in a traditional practice policy, that $1 million limit would be reduced above the deductible for every dollar of claim expense paid in. What the endorsement does for smaller firms is it basically bifurcates the indemnity payment versus the claims expense, so that any claims expenses first go to the limit of liability available under the endorsement and does not touch the practice policy. If you do have a severe enough claim where somehow the claims expenses exceed the available limit for claims expenses that are being brought, in this case $500,000, the practice policy would still continue to pay, indemnity and claims expenses as well. So practice policy provides all of that coverage. The endorsement, again, provides a buffer or another avenue to help protect the practice policy that the firm is purchasing. And for that reason, it's really important when you're coming in to talk to a small firm, or if you're engaging with a broader audience, or just trying to build that a bit of the elevator speech or the position to the underwriter of what options are you looking to provide for the firm, both as you balance limit and retention elements. And it's super important in that situation to make sure that you tee up the prospect to think through that process to give you a better avenue of what's appropriate. And if we're talking about what brokers are sharing and what clients share to brokers, then I'm going to flip it back to Jake to talk a little bit about how you can take your client's temperature to address at a high level some key things to help drive this decision.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. One of the things as the distribution team, as we meet with our brokers, we do like to try to help guide and talk about, what it is with a particular coverage that we can help our brokers to provide value to their clients when they're trying to drive their client's decision on whether it be limit, deductible, carrier. So these are some of the things that we have traditionally had conversations around. And if you look at these, and I'll go through them here in a minute, they're really intertwined. I mean, you can look at one, individually in a vacuum, but in reality, it's the totality of these questions that really are what help kind of drive that conversation and that decision. So if you look at like the cost of premium against the certainty of limit protection, this goes back to what Kevin was saying about the Fram oil filter. The pay me now, pay me later is the real value. And some of this obviously is driven around the financial position of your client as well, right? Do you want to buy higher limits? Do you have cash flow for that to happen? Or are you wanting to have lower limits for whatever reason, whatever constraints? When you look at the level of concern on frivolous lawsuits, it's the lightning rod, right? I mean, your client could be in an area that's very litigious, or could be involved in certain classes of business or clients that there's more of a high susceptibility. The project could drive that to some degree as well. So making, when you look at retention against some of that, is your client better positioned for a $2,500 deductible, a $5,000 deductible, a $10,000 deductible? Against some of that, and it really plays into a frequency. So that's where I look at the contingency plan. If you have multiple losses in a year, is your client able to handle multiple claims, and what is the deductible level that they can really handle those claims at? 2,500, 3 or 4 $2,500 claims, or 3 or 4 $10,000 claims. Obviously, that can be a big indicator of where your client really wants to try to better position themselves. And really, if you look at having those discussions with your client, you're always thinking long term. You're thinking, what's going to happen to this client's business in the next 3 to 5 years? What is their growth? What is your client telling you to better help you position them now, so that you can grow with them in the future? It could be that they're looking to expand their operation into different classes of work. You could have, just a regular architect that's looking and going into either geotechnical or structural. They're wanting to be a multidiscipline firm. That could change the dynamics really quickly of your client and your client's needs as it relates to coverage, as it relates to limit, and it relates obviously to deductible level if you're in a higher risk type of classes of work. So really, I think if you're looking at how they're expanding their business, if you look at all these pieces in totality, it really is about where do you see their business over the next few years, and how do you position them today? How are you going to position them tomorrow? And then how are you going to position them in 3 to 5 years? And I really think that goes to what we try to talk about is retention of clients, right? You're able to keep your clients long-term because you're thinking ahead for them on what their needs are going to be. And it makes it a little bit easier for them, I think, from a financial position to better estimate and budget year to year, knowing what that's going to be. Kevin, you have anything on this?
The only thing that I would add, and I think that's a great, kind of a great fundamental element, is one thing that we see with small firms, and I think you as the broker, can read that whether it's on the phone or in person, I guess in a post-COVID environment off of Zoom or Teams or something like that, is kind of what's driving the firm. So especially when you get that call from a new prospect that's looking to set up his own company, there's always that element of risk that the firm is willing to assume in combination with where do they see themselves in that 3-year basis. Invariably with, our 65-year program, but I would say especially over the last 20 years, I've seen, different types of firms, one that fit into 2 different categories with the small firm. One, which is, they grow, but they grow at a small pace, or they kind of have a high level, window of comfort level as to what they want to do. Those are pretty standard small firms that'll be small firms for a long time. And then you get the individual that's setting up a new company that's coming out of a larger company or has more aspirations to grow exponentially. And in a short window of a couple of years to 3 years, they've doubled, tripled, quadrupled in size, and suddenly have become not only a larger risk from a premium exposure standpoint, but also just a different animal within your agency to be able to handle too. So this is another great conversation that you can have to drill down not only on that, but to build more on the business and where they're going. Jake, we did have one question that popped up, and I guess we can kind of speak to it, but maybe I'll take a first crack at it. So the question is just recognizing that with these types of firms from a revenue standpoint, depending on your agency relationship, one is that your CSR that's working with you, or centralized system, or perhaps more of an email communication versus going out to the office is the approach that you deal with on these firms. And I think that's completely appropriate. So the question was just, how do you integrate this conversation or what we're talking about into those types of settings? So I would just overlay from a business standpoint, my recommendation to you would be to add this coverage request into your underwriter market standpoint so that you can get this type of option on all of your small firms that are eligible as you continue to guide through the sales process or have some of those conversations, knowing that hand-holding or efficiency of getting the client a quote quickly is really a driver both from your internal costs and for what the client's looking for. So we find that brokers are having more success in this area, are proactively asking for this endorsement to be added if available. We're not the only ones that offer this in the marketplace, but it is fairly limited, overall, that it's not an option available to every program. So depending on whether or not this prospect has current coverage, you're trying to convince them to work with you versus another agency, this may be a wedge or a way to differentiate on offering an option that they haven't. that they haven't considered. So that would be my recommendation, is if your model is more email or calling on the phone or other things, is along with using these techniques, also push back on the underwriters and make sure that your market submission letter or email proactively asks for options on this type of coverage, so that you can present that to the client and see if it's an opportunity, again, to differentiate versus their other programs.
Yeah, because this coverage is very unique because it is geared specifically to small firms. So that's why if you look at some of the other coverages, they're not, right? So that's why you really do have to ask for this for your small firm clients when it comes in. I have a question here, Kevin, as well. So have all the new 2020 policy enhancements, the form enhancement, is that applicable and been approved in all states? And are there any other new changes that are really coming down the pike?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Because I know earlier in this conversation, I mentioned 47 states, and at last count, that it means not every state's been approved. So this endorsement was first filed as part of that 2020 change. So if you're in the state of Vermont, South Dakota, or if you're in the U.S. Virgin Islands, I apologize because this coverage is not currently available. However, if you're in any other state, then this coverage has been approved by the insurance commissioner and is now available. The other thing that I would kind of add to this is, again, it was attached to the new insuring agreement. So even if you've had renewals under the 2020 form and was not aware of this coverage or available, we add it as part of the renewal cycle for ease of doing business. But I would also, don't forget that there are other tools to look at within that retention structure. Because separate from this endorsement for small firms, we have a zero deductible option for those that are happy to pay the premium and are less risk tolerant to any type of retention. Obviously, we can take deductibles up to a reasonable amount depending on the firm size. And then we also have each and every, along with first dollar defense coverage, that could be added as far as an endorsement for the deductible to be able to engage it. So this endorsement around separate limit of liability works in combination with whatever deductible the firm selects. So within that nuance, if you've got a pure $0 deductible that applies to both indemnity and claims expenses, that means that $1 of the claims expenses would be part of the endorsement if connected. If you had a $2,000 deductible, but it was first dollar defense, then again, the separate endorsement would attach first dollar because there's no deductible for claims expenses. So there's a lot of rabbit holes and iterations that brokers can be effective in trying to manage the value of what the premium cost is relative to that level of risk that the firm is looking for. And just checking, that last question, Jake, that we have here is just, does the regular claim coverage on the policy, I'm going to presume practice policy, still exist or get removed upon purchase of the endorsement? That's a very good question. And to reiterate, it does not remove or change any of the coverage that's offered under the practice policy. All that the endorsement does is create an additional limit of liability and an avenue for claims expenses to be covered under the policy. So again, once the deductible is met, with the endorsement, cost for claims expenses, experts, defense counsel costs that are paid by CNA would be reduced off of the endorsement that's being purchased, and therefore the practice policy limit would not be reduced. But the bottom line is, if the endorsement's met and the maximum aggregate is met, then the coverage flows back into the practice policy, as well. So it doesn't change any of the other terms and conditions of the policy. It just helps to manage how claims expenses are paid and giving the client an avenue to mitigate the risk to their reduction of their practice limit. That's a great question. I really appreciate that. Well, Jake, it's pretty quick how time flies in a quick 30-minute conversation. So, I know that you guys will probably have some additional questions or maybe something specific to the clients that you're dealing with. So happy to share our email addresses below if you'd like to reach out to Jake or myself. Happy to kind of continue the conversation and talk through it. I did bury the lead, Jake, because you asked me about if there were some other things coming. So as we look forward into the end of the first quarter and beginning of the second quarter too, we are looking at an additional filing in about 14 to 15 states. Additionally, we're adding some what we call countrywide endorsements that are available across all states that deal with specific issues. We're seeing some different changes around mergers and acquisitions or how firms would like to attach acquired firms and other avenues as well. So, as we continue along with our webinar series, we will bring you more information on this and other things that you can translate into quick and adaptable solutions for your clients. So with that, Jake, thanks for your time. Appreciate your conversation, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.